Hi there. My name is Dan. I'm from the state of Washington, and I want to let you know that I think your show is incredible. It's to the point. I love the music that you include. I love the other interjections that you have in there. It's a wonderful show about evolution. There's no other podcast like it. Please continue with the show. It's fantastic. The length is perfect. You're doing a great job, Rick. Thank you so much.
There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
The world needs heroes. Kids needed heroes during World War II and the Cold War, like Captain America and Superman. Noble heroes with noble goals. But both heroes came from different universes, those universes being DC Comics and Marvel Comics. The pages of the comics, produced by both publishers, were filled with more characters than one could count. And the superheroes were as amazing as they were colorful. Even the villains sold issues. If Dr. Doom was on a cover, I bought it. There were characters to fill every niche, be it a swamp, the ocean, or the sky. Now, if your character lived under the sea like Aquaman, there were certain things that he had to be able to do, like breathe underwater, for instance. Some characters could even fly. There were similarities between the heroes that stalked the pages of both DC and Marvel. And here in the real world, it's really no different. Take an environment, any environment or ecological niche, find a similar one on the other side of the world, and you just may see similar creatures. Creatures which evolved separately but share structures which perform the same functions. It's so prevalent that there's a term for it as well. It's called Convergent Evolution. The way to look at it is this. Every living thing on this planet shares a common ancestor at some point in the far distant past. Now, in some cases, that common ancestor existed millions of years ago. Now, since that time, you will see similar adaptations develop separately that were not present in that common ancestor. Now, a classic example of this is the power of flight. Birds fly and bats fly. Now, their last common ancestor could not. Now, over the last few million years, they both separately developed the ability to lift themselves off of the ground to hunt and to escape being hunted. Now, they can both do this, but the way they do it is different. Now, while they both have the ability to fly, the underlying structure which allows them to do so is built differently. Built differently, but using the same bones that were present in their last common ancestor. They both have arms with the same bone structure that they inherited from their common ancestor. That bone structure is practically universal among vertebrates. You and I share it as well. Our forearms are made up of an ulna and a radius. It's the same with birds and bats. When you get to their fingers, their metacarpals and phalanges, things are much different. For us humans, our metacarpals and phalanges evolved to allow us to grasp or to pick things up. Now, in birds, they developed into a different structure, more like an extension of their forearm, which their feathers could attach to. Bats have extremely long fingers. The bones which their leathery wings are attached to are actually their metacarpals and their phalanges, the same ones that we have, only longer. This underlying bone structure, because it is the same, is considered homologous. Now, we all share this structure because it was present in our common ancestor. The wings themselves, those structures which allow for flight in both bats and birds, are different. They are considered analogous structures. They evolved to perform the same function separately in different species. Now, I'm not going to focus on the terms analogous and homologous for now. I only bring them up because it's the analogous structures, the similar ones which evolved in unrelated species, that are examples of convergent evolution.
They call him clever, faster than light.
Now, recognize that sound? That's a dolphin. And this is a bat. Now, what do they have in common? It's called echolocation. Now, think of it as biological sonar. The way bats and dolphins do this is by emitting short bursts of sounds, which bounces off of whatever objects or obstacles happen to be in front of them. Now, they can judge, unconsciously of course, how large and how far away the object is by the intensity of the returning sound waves. And this is human echolocation. Yes, people can do it too. By using a series of clicks, a person, when properly trained, can navigate the world, even ride a bike, by using a form of echolocation. Now, while this is a skill that can be learned by you or I, in the case of bats and dolphins, it is an example of convergent evolution. They may both be mammals, but the most recent common ancestor between the two lived around 60 million years ago and did not have this ability. It evolved separately, and because bats and dolphins are built differently than one another, their use of biosonar is slightly different. And then there's the human eye. It's a wonderful piece of machinery. It's intricate, it's complicated, and it's also flawed. You see, you have a blind spot. You might not be aware of it because your eye movements compensate for it and your brain fills in the gap. But it's there. It's there because your optic nerve evolved to plug into the eye in front of the retina. Now, the retina is a layer of light-sensitive cells which coats the inner part of your eye. So, while the human eye might have caused William Paley to exclaim,
"Just look at the complexity of the human eye." Thus, we must conclude that nature has a maker too.
It also tells us that the designer wasn't exactly the one that Paley had in mind. The designer in this instance was evolution by natural selection, a series of adaptations building upon one another to create a remarkable navigation tool that uses light instead of sound. Some estimates put the evolution of the eye as happening over 40 different times in unrelated species. Again, by unrelated, I mean that they are separated by millions of years and evolved into completely different species. In cephalopods, like the squid, the eye is wired differently. And by different, I mean it is wired much better than our own, with the optic nerve cells coming in behind the retina. So there's no blind spot. Now, in some cases, convergent evolution is obvious, as in the case with bats and dolphins, two separate species which have evolved a similar method of biosonar to navigate the world, and also with the different forms of eyes which animals have evolved to take advantage of light-sensitive cells. Now, these are all pretty clear-cut examples, but it's not always that easy. In some cases, it could be instances of re-evolution, meaning that certain genes that had been present in a common ancestor were somehow switched off. Now, this could happen for any number of reasons, the most common one being some sort of mutation which did so. And then, long after the ancestor had evolved into two separate species, say even millions of years later, another mutation comes along and turns the gene back on. Now, what might seem to have been a case of convergent evolution might simply have been a faulty switch. In his book, Wonderful Life, biologist Stephen Jay Gould famously said that if you rewound the tape of life, you might see an entirely different story play out. The world as we know it might be populated by different designs and different solutions. Now, we could get into a whole philosophical argument here about determinism and theories about time and reality, but we're going to stick to biology. I can see why Professor Gould would say this. Now, who's to say that those mutations that came along to shape the eye would come along again were the entire thing to be started over? Nature might find another way of using those early light-sensitive cells. So who's to say legs would have evolved, or even noses? Any number of things may have occurred differently. Now, this is what David Aguilar thinks. He's the Director of Science Information at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge. Now, how would you like to have that as your job title? Now, in a talk made available by the USA Science and Engineering Festival, he had this to say.
Now we know our solar system is not unique. There are a lot of other solar systems out there. We also began to see very young planets about the size of the Earth. And so we assume that on these worlds, life is going to do the same thing it did on Earth. It will start very simply. Life on Earth will start simple. And over the millions and millions and millions of years, it will get more complex and more complex. And we expect after 2 or 3 billion years have passed on these worlds, there may even be intelligent creatures now living on the surfaces of these planets.
But then he reimagined what might happen instead. Not by rewinding the clock of time as Professor Gould had suggested, but by using our telescopes and looking out into the universe at other worlds, other planets with the capability of sustaining life. Now, he dreamed about what they might be like.
I dreamed about how big they might be and how different they might be. I dreamed of the jungle worlds that might exist and creatures that were plants that were as intelligent as human beings that moved underground on these worlds. I dreamed about icy, cold worlds and the creatures that would exist on these particular planets.
But not everyone agrees. Just like convergent evolution has shown us that nature will find similar solutions under similar conditions, so too might it be on other planets. Life might not look that much different than it does here. One advocate of life following a similar path on another world, or even had we started the whole thing over again, is paleontologist Simon Conway Morris.
If you want to learn how to swim, how to fly, how to walk, if you want to learn how to breathe, if you want to even learn how to reproduce, even things which go down to rather settled business about why we have sexes and things like that, even the nature of the chromosomes on this planet actually have various sorts of predictabilities about them.
It's those predictabilities that Professor Conway Morris would like us to focus on.
But I think that when we do detect alien life, it will be, well, strikingly, embarrassingly, will it be like us?
Now, if Professor Conway Morris is right, convergent evolution plays an extremely important role in the history of life both on this planet and on every other planet out there, at least those that are capable of sustaining life. And if there is another planet like this one out there, then it might be inhabited by creatures very much like us. Creatures with eyes, creatures with mouths, ears, and even 2 legs. Or, then again, as astronomer David Aguilar sees, that life might be nothing like anything we have ever seen, or can even imagine. And that's today's show. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please share it with somebody. Now, I love producing Evolution Talk, and I hope to continue doing so for a long time. And you can help by supporting the show. Just point your browser or your smart device to evolutiontalk.com/support. And thank you ahead of time for doing so. And if you want to learn more about the music on today's episode, you can find all of this and more at the show's official site, evolutiontalk.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening and for supporting the show. And until next time, please take care of yourself.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.